Morning, everyone. How are we? Asleep? Hope we're good. We're going to reach kind of the end of the battles in Canaan today, which is a bit of a relief because it's a very bloodthirsty part of the Bible. And it's a bloodthirsty part of the Bible for those of you who haven't been with us on the journey so far. That's because it is the point at which God deals with the problems of Canaan. And Canaan was a place where evil was running pretty much unchecked, child sacrifice, all sorts of terrible practices. So when we look at the violence that to follow, we have to look at that in the context. It's not a bloodthirsty God going out beating people up for no reason. It's God dealing with a problem that needed to be dealt with. So there's a bit of context for those of you who haven't been on the journey so far. I thought I'd give you a different picture for the journey, the story so far. And I don't know if that's big enough for you to read it, but it gives you a context on the whole book of Joshua. The first few chapters, I've got the wrong glasses on to give you this in tremendous detail, but chapters 1 to 5, which we looked at September, being about preparation, about the nation of Israel getting ready for battle. Chapters 6 to 12 being about the battles. And then thereafter, the division of the land, which is, if you like, the administrative completion of the plan for the settlement of Canaan by the Israelites, and then the end of Joshua's life. So we are reaching the end of part 2 today, which is the conquering of Canaan and the taking of Canaan by the people of Israel. Interestingly, it's taken us pretty much 2 months to get through this far, and we're going to do the second half of the book in 2 weeks. So we'll see how we go with that. There's a big challenge for anyone who wants to read next week, because the reading about the division of the land is not the most fascinating read that you're ever going to have, but it's in the Bible for a reason. So we're going to look at it next week of why that's there and what we can learn from that. But today we rejoin the story after Israel has defeated Ai. Second time round. Who was here when Leo spoke last week? He was good, wasn't he? I enjoyed listening to Leo. So Ai is conquered, and now we're on to the main battles in Canaan in chapters 9 to 12. Now, for those of you who like maps, here's a map. For those of you listening on tape, there's a map here now. But basically, we're looking at how the scale and the shape of the battles and the war in Canaan. So the first part, chapter 6 to 9, is all around that central part where Israel deals with Jericho, deals with Ai, and so on, and deals with some people we're going to look at today. Then there's a big campaign to the south where there's a fight. Spoiler alert, there's a fight with a big army, and then a few more cities to get knocked off afterwards. And then we go north and do it all again. And we're not going to deal with chapters 10 and 11 in tremendous detail, but we will look at them this morning. But that is the shape of what Israel was doing. It happened in about a year, but it's over a very large geographical area. And that hopefully gives you some context of what we're actually talking about here in the center, in the south, and in the north. So let's get into chapter 9. Now, when all the kings west of the Jordan heard about these things, the kings in the hill country, in the western foothills, and along the entire coast of the Mediterranean Sea as far as Lebanon, the kings of the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, they came together to wage war against Joshua and Israel. It's quite interesting that after we've been reading, particularly with Jericho, that the enemies of God have been melting in fear of Israel, that now they're saying, we need to take them on. And they're mobilizing a coalition to take them on. And I think there's a good possibility this is because the struggle that Israel had with Ai and the defeat they had first times at the hands of Ai has kind of broken the aura of invincibility that the Israelites have. And so the remaining large groups are saying, okay, we can take them on. We need to take them on. And they mobilize and they build a big coalition force to take on Israel. The stakes are raised now. These are big coalitions. These are coalitions of 5 or more kings. Kings were like rulers of cities and groups of cities, just to give you the context of how Canaan used to work. But I put that under the heading, give the enemy an inch and he'll take a mile. So here we are. The coalitions are forming, and there's going to be some bigger, sterner battles ahead for Israel. So now let's get into a strange story of what happened with the people of Gibeon in this context. So here's the scripture from chapter 9. However, when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse. This all gets a bit allo and a bit pantomime in places, and I've kind of got images in my mind of false beards and hats and stuff because it's all quite curious, but see what you think. They went as a delegation whose donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. They put worn and patched sandals on their feet and wore old clothes. All the bread of their food supply was dry and mouldy. And then they went to Joshua at the camp at Gilgal and said to him at the Israelites, "We've come from a distant country. Make a treaty with us." Interestingly, if you read back into Deuteronomy, the Lord says to Israel, you can make a treaty with distant people groups, but not with local people groups in Canaan. So clearly, the Gibeonites knew a bit about Jewish law and knew a bit about what the Israelites could and couldn't do. So it's quite well considered that they were positioning themselves as people who come from a long way away. So the Israelites said to the Hivites, which is the Gibeonites were Hivites, "But perhaps you live near us, so how can we make a treaty with you?" Good thought. "We are your servants," they said to Joshua. But Joshua asked, "Who are you and where do you come from?" They answered, "Your servants have come from a very distant country because of the fame of the Lord your God. For we have heard reports of him, all he did in Egypt, and all he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth. And our elders and all those living in the country said to us, 'Take provisions for your journey, go and meet them, and say to them, we are your servants, make a treaty with us.' This bread of ours was warm when we packed it at home on the day we left to come to you." Yeah, right. "But now look how dry and mouldy it is. And these wineskins we filled were new, but look how cracked they are. And our clothes and sandals are so worn out by the very long journey." The Israelites sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. Then Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. So here we have the Gibeonite deception. A cunning plan from the Gibeonites to get under the guard of the Israelites to say, make a treaty with us. By the way, anybody want to guess how far Gibeon was from Ai? About 5 miles. So the Gibeonites were nearer to where the Israelites were than we are to Welwyn Garden City, for example. They had 4 towns all between 5 and 10 miles away. They were really close. They were really close when they put on their false beards and hats and faked their various tricky things. They had some pretty dodgy props, but they stood up to immediate scrutiny when Joshua tried it out. The Israelites displayed a serious lack of curiosity. It all smelt a bit fishy, didn't it? The whole thing smelt a bit fishy. Why did these people come out of nowhere? Who were they? But it's successful because the Israelites failed to consult the Lord. When was the last time you took an important decision and didn't consult the Lord? Today? Yesterday, maybe? Beware when there's big decisions to be taken. Make sure that we consult the Lord and check in with him. And there you go, done. And they were done. So what then happens? What then happens is 3 days after they made the treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites heard they were neighbors living near them. So the Israelites set out and on the 3rd day came to their cities, Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. But the Israelites did not attack them because the leaders of the assembly had sworn an oath to them by the God of Israel, the Lord. The whole assembly grumbled against the leaders. That would never happen today, would it? But all the leaders answered, "We gave them our oath by the Lord, the God of Israel, and we cannot touch them now. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live so that God's wrath will not fall on us for breaking the oath we swore." They continued, "Let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers in the service of the whole assembly." So the leader's promise to them was kept. Then Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and said, "Why did you deceive us by saying we live a long way away when actually you live near us? You are now under a curse. You will never be released from service as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of God." And they answered Joshua, "Your servants were clearly told how the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you the whole land and to wipe out its inhabitants from before you." Isn't that interesting? That's what they heard. That's what the Gibeonites heard and why they came. "So we feared for our lives because of you, and that's why we did this. We are now in your hands. Do to us whatever seems good and right to you." So Joshua saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. That day he made the Gibeonites woodcutters and water carriers for the assembly to provide for the needs of the altar of the Lord at the place the Lord would choose. And that is what they do to this day. So it's a right mess now. It's a right mess. You've got the Israelites furious and wanting to take vengeance, but the leaders bound by an oath they've taken. And if there's one thing we know about the Lord, he takes covenants really seriously. And they know they can't break a covenant they've just sworn before the Lord. A covenant's a covenant. And what Joshua does is exercise quite a lot of wisdom here to find a solution which doesn't break the covenant, but to a degree will pacify Israel. Now, question for you. What is your gut reaction about what the Gibeonites did and whether they should have got away with it? What's your gut reaction? Is your gut reaction, that's ridiculous, they faked and lied their way in and they've got away with it? Is that your gut reaction? I think it's a reasonable gut reaction. Is your gut reaction, "Oh, that's lovely, everyone's friends"? Not my gut reaction the first time I read it. The Gibeonites are cheats who deserve punishment, is the fact of the matter. They were dishonest and they conned the Israelites. But what happens if we compare the Gibeonites with the other Canaanite who made peace with Israel? Anyone tell me who the other Canaanite who made peace with Israel was? Chapter 2, Rahab. This is what Rahab said in Joshua 2, verse 11. "The Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below." Rahab confessed God as being the Lord of all, the Lord of heaven and the Lord of earth. And she acted on that confession with her protection and defense of the spies. The Gibeonites say, "Your servants were clearly told how the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you the whole land and wipe out its inhabitants. So we feared for our lives, and that is why we did this. We are now in your hands. Do to us whatever seems good and right to you." So the Gibeonites actually are the only nation, I say nation, people group, to seek peace with Israel. They actually sought peace. They recognized the supreme power of the God of Israel. In fear, yeah, but they recognized the supreme power. They were willing to submit to the authority and justice of Joshua. I think that's really interesting. They said, "Do to us what you think is right and fair." And they accepted lowly service without grumbling, without complaint. They accepted what was coming their way as being just, like they said they would. And they received grace from the Lord. And this is my first aha that the Lord really gave me about this. He said the Gibeonites receive undeserved grace. And to our rational minds, and we like to apply justice to everything, they did it in a dishonest and sneaky way. But here we go. Who ever deserved grace from God anyway? And why would we, sitting here as we are today, feel as though we deserve grace and they didn't? The whole point of grace is it's undeserved. The whole point of grace is it's a free gift out of the mercy and love of God, despite what we have done. And it's no different from the Gibeonites, for the Gibeonites then, as it is for me standing here today. I am a recipient of God's grace, undeserved, given free, out of his mercy and out of his love. So we should rejoice that the Gibeonites were also recipients of grace, rather than being judgmental over them and saying, well, actually, we're better than they are. Because guess what? We're not. It's grace. It's free. It's undeserved. That's the nature of grace. You just spoiled what I was about to say. Thank you. Thank you. That's amazing. That's amazing. No, look, it doesn't matter what our motives are to seek peace with God. It doesn't actually matter whether our motives are fear, whatever it is that drives us to God. There's a lot of people in this room today who found God because they found absolute darkness and terror elsewhere in the world, and it drove them to find the truth, to find the giver of life. It doesn't matter what brings you here. And to your point, this is a message for anyone from another faith, from another tradition, from another culture, from another country, that God's grace is waiting for you the moment you seek him. The moment you seek him. You're not disqualified. So if you've been following another faith or another tradition, guess what? God's mercy is still available to you today. If you're from another culture or another country that has different practices and different values, God's grace and mercy and love is available to you today. We need to take this message to people. We mustn't stand in judgment. God forbid we stand in judgment over people who have yet to find him. Our purpose is to share God's love and declare his mercy and proclaim his grace to everyone we meet, wherever they come from. It's a message for everybody. Come and receive grace. And you put it better than I can. So thank you. So that's the Gibeonites. We're going to have a quick whiz through chapters 10 and 11. It's interesting, there's like two messages today, but there's a reason there's two messages today. And you've just heard part one. Here's part two. So here we are back in the conquest of the rest of Canaan. We're going to go quite quickly through Joshua 10 and Joshua 11. Now, what happens, and I'm not going to read it all because it takes quite a long time. If you'd like to read it, I encourage you to read it. But they're quite similar stories, so I want to bring out some of the similarities between Joshua 10 and Joshua 11. So there are parallel battles in the south and in the north. There are enemy coalitions out there, so the stakes have been raised. In the south, there are 5 Amorite kings, and in the north, it's more wide and spread out, and there aren't particular named kings. There's one who's named as kind of the big shot out there, but it's a very wide and dispersed group coming together from a big geographical area, presenting a different challenge to Joshua and his army. In the south, there's also 7 further cities that they conquer at the end of the battle with the coalition. And there's just for those of you who like biblical mysteries and riddles, it's speculated there were more than 7 cities, but 7 is a representative number. And for those of you who are Bible students and like numbers and like images in the Bible, 7 is the perfect, complete number. So it's suggested that 7 is enough to describe a bigger number, representative of a bigger number. They chose to resist by force, and this is what ultimately brings God's judgment on them. Unlike the Gibeonites, who say, the Lord of Israel is too big for me to take on anymore, they resist by force, instead of making peace, as Rahab did and as the Gibeonites did. In both stories, God promises victory before the battle starts. So in the south, Joshua 10 verse 8, the Lord says, do not be afraid of them, I have given them into your hand. And in the north, Joshua 11 verse 6, do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them slain over to Israel. So going into battle, they have sought the Lord, and the Lord has promised them victory. And it's a different feeling going into battle when the Lord has promised you victory than going into battle, crossing your fingers and trusting your own strength. God is engaged in the battle. God is engaged in the battle. The Israelites, there's ambushes in both stories. I didn't pull that one out, but there's ambushes in both stories. The Israelites ambushed the southern coalition. God's confused them. It's recorded that God confused them, possibly because they're being ambushed at like 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm often quite confused at 6 o'clock in the morning. Don't know about you. And then he finished them off with hailstones 20 miles down the road. Interesting, it's 20 miles. They pursued them 20 miles before they were finished off with hailstones, and it says in the scripture that more died from the hailstones than from the hand of the Israelites. In the north, Joshua and his own army came against them suddenly at the waters of Merom, and attacked them, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. The Lord is in the battle. We must remember that. The Lord doesn't send us out and then leave us to it. The Lord is in the battle for every minute of it. And then there's the fate of the enemy kings. This is a bloodthirsty for the squeamish. You're allowed to switch off for a moment. What happens in the south is 5 kings are slaughtered, put under the feet of the Israelites. If ever you've wondered at the phrase, "I will make your enemies a footstool under your feet," that's an image of a defeated opponent with their head under your feet at the end of the battle. So that's what a footstool, your enemies being a footstool, is actually all about. And those 5 kings are slaughtered and they're exhibited, so the Israelites know that God is with them and is irresistible. In the north, the king of Hazor is also put to the sword. He's like the big shot leader of the enemies in the north. So there's your quick summary of Joshua's 10:11. It's bloodthirsty. It's uncomfortable reading for people in a 21st century Western culture. But it's because the Canaanites refused to yield to God. It's because they continued to resist, and because their sin reached full fruit. They reached the end. They'd had their chances. And we need to be aware that Revelation talks about people still getting more chances, but there coming a day when we'll run out of time. We'll run out of time, which is why it's urgent we let as many people know as possible about the grace and mercy of God before that day arrives. So, let us go to the end of the conflict. As the Lord, I'm going to read the whole passage to you, but here's a couple of verses out of the end of it. As the Lord commanded his servant Moses, so Moses commanded Joshua, and Joshua did it. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses. So Joshua took this entire land, the hill country, all the Negev, the whole region of Goshen, the western foothills, the Arabah, and the mountains of Israel with their foothills, from Mount Halak, which rises towards Seir, to Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon below Mount Hermon, across this big geographical area, in other words. He captured all their kings and put them to death. Joshua waged war against all these kings for a long time. And except for the Hivites living in Gibeon, not one city made a treaty of peace with the Israelites, who took them all in battle. For it was the Lord himself who hardened their hearts to wage war against Israel, so that he might destroy them totally, exterminating them without mercy, as the Lord had commanded Moses. I read hardened hearts has allowed their hearts to become completely hardened. At that time, Joshua went and destroyed the Anakites from the hill country. Interesting people, the Anakites, we'll come back to that. From Hebron, Debir, and Anab, from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua totally destroyed them and their towns, and no Anakites were left in Israelite territory. Only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did any survive. So Joshua took the entire land, just as the Lord had directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel, according to their tribal divisions. And then the land had rest from war, which probably got a very big hallelujah from everyone in Canaan and from the Israelites. So in summary, Joshua chapters 7 to 11, from the start of the first battle with Jericho through to the piece we've just read, the Anakites, sets out a long, relentless and bloody campaign of war to the final victory of the Anakites. And I said I was going to tell you who the Anakites are. Any Bible students out there who know who the Anakites are? I would like to pretend that this is my great wisdom, but I read it in a commentary. But it's cool. The Anakites are the people that the spies were afraid of back in Numbers 13. They were the Anakites. So it's really interesting that the very people who made Israel afraid to enter Canaan at all are the last to be toppled. And it's almost like the completeness, the fear of the Anakites that paralyzed them, it's gone. Even the Anakites have gone now. The last scary thing has been finished off. And I think it's just really symmetrical and tidy that the Anakites are like the end of the story. Dozens of battles, bloody conflict, many lives gone. And the Israelites didn't wage a flawless campaign. They had a few mess-ups along the way, as we've read. Not listening to the Lord. And the passage we read about the Gibeonites not testing what he was saying, not seeking his wisdom on the truth. And disobedience that we read and Leo preached on last week with Achan and Ai, with hidden sin undermining the effectiveness of the nation. But for the most part, Joshua sought and led the Israelites according to God's instructions. And as a result, came out victorious in conquering the enemies of God in the land of Canaan and ready to receive their inheritance, which we're going to look at next week. So here's a question for you. How does this play into our lives today? How does it play into our lives today? We've been reading, as we've gone through this, lots of hints from the Lord, and we've had lots of things happen to people in the church and around the church, which have made it very clear to us that we're engaged in a battle. We're engaged in a battle. The values of Canaan are quite similar to the values of our world in a lot of ways. We live in a little outpost. It's not quite as clean and tidy because we already live here, but we live in our own version of Canaan. And whether you're a believer or not, we all know there's good and evil out there. We all know there's forces of evil causing untold damage in our communities and in our world. But what are the battles that we're fighting? Well, firstly, there's personal battles. I don't know how many of you have been struggling lately. I know lots of people who've gone through lots of battles, and there are all sorts of things. Some of them are to do with finances, work stress, just getting through every day, mental challenges, emotional hang-ups, fights that seem to come out of nowhere for no reason other than to hassle us and bother us and make life difficult. So you know your battles. I'm not going to ask you to disclose them today. Not because I don't care, but that's not the point of this conversation. The point is, what do we do about it? And we need to reflect on what we've been reading in this book, particularly in chapters 1 to 6, of how we prepare ourselves for battle. So if you want to be prepared for your battles, number one, keep yourself holy. Keep yourself separate. Don't allow yourself to be corrupted by the world we live in. Don't allow compromise into your life. Don't allow secular values to sneak into how you operate. Don't allow hidden sin to infect your walk with God. Keep yourself holy. And number two, pray continually. And continually is a good word. For those of you who like the English language, the difference between continual and continuous. Continuous means without stopping. Continual means again and again and again and again and again. So repeatedly, again and again and again and again and again. Practice active faith like Rahab. I had another baby revelation, which is a revelation to me. You guys probably all know this already, about what the nature of obedience. Obedience is only active faith. It's all it is. All it is living out what you believe, which is what active faith is. And guess what? If you're exercising active faith, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be being obedient, living an obedient life to God. Obedience is not a burden. Obedience is a response to our faith and belief in the loving, graceful, merciful God that we serve. And I don't know why I've put this here, but it must be for somebody, which says, don't ever get fooled by times of victory. Don't ever get fooled by times of victory. Don't get broken out of your rhythm of holiness and prayer and devotion to God by victory, by partying about victory, and by getting a bit pleased with ourselves. Secondly, what about the battles in a church group? Many of you are on, I believe, on our WhatsApp prayer groups. We've got 2 of them at the moment. And I've been struck in the last couple of weeks by the volume going, oh, another one, and 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 another one. There's lots of battles in our church grouping. And those we see are the tip of the iceberg. Most people don't necessarily feel a need to call other people to pray and join in. That's the tip of the iceberg. There's quite a big iceberg of issues out there within our church grouping. What's our responsibility? It's to love one another. Did you know that? And loving one another it means watching, caring, and taking responsibility for one another. It doesn't mean having warm feelings when we meet. It doesn't mean smiling and being kind to each other when we have church lunches, although that's a good thing, so let's do that too. But with God's mercy, we will do that well. But we do it because so many people here are determined to allow the Holy Spirit to rule their lives. That's why it happens. And it's really clear in the Bible. It says that's how people are going to know that you're disciples of God. It's because of your love for one another. But love for one another is an active, brutal thing. An example from my childhood, if you want to love, I can demonstrate how much more my wife loved our infant child than I did. Because when our infant child was on the change mat, vomiting, throwing up and being in this disgusting mess, she picked him up and cuddled him without hesitation. That's love. That's love. She didn't go, ugh. It's a response. It's a response out of your heart to the need that you see in front of you. That's the love we're called to one another. So are we... And the other thing for the church fellowship is a lesson from today, really, from the Gibeonites, is are we constantly listening out for the guidance of our God? Are we constantly listening out for the guidance of our God? It's a particular responsibility for people in positions of leadership in the church. But don't be fooled into believing only people who have an official label are leaders in the church. There are lots of leaders in the church. So please listen out for the guidance of God. And if you hear something, pass it on, pass it on, pass it on. We have many ears between us. Let's use them. And then finally, the last battle to talk about is the battle in our community. And this is something that is very current for us in terms of words people have had from the Lord, things that have happened, things to sharpen our attention on what's going on in our community at the moment. The direction of travel of secular culture is not positive. It's not good. You say you don't need to necessarily to be a believer to recognize there's a lot of stuff happening and bubbling under, which is not good. It's not loving, it's not kind, it is not for the benefit of everybody. It's, well, you know about it. Spiritually, the enemy is on the prowl, like a roaring lion, we are told. He doesn't want to interrupt and disturb your life. He wants to pull you down with him. He wants to pull you down with him. He wants to get you out of your relationship with God. He wants to destroy you. That's what the enemy wants to do. And we live in a 21st century Canaan. It's quite, honestly, the Halloween time of year is quite a useful time of year for us because it's completely in your face. It's completely in your face, the celebration of the occult and the celebration of stuff that is not holy and is not good. So if we live in a 21st century Canaan, the question is, are we prepared to fight? Are we prepared to fight and are we ready to fight? You'd be glad to know I'm coming into land. And there's 2 things. You need to listen to the Lord a bit on one of these. The first thing is to invite ministry for anyone who is ready, like the Gibeonites, to accept the grace of God, to say, okay, this has gone on long enough. You know who I am, like you were saying. We all have a moment in our lives when we have the opportunity, sometimes many moments, I had more than one, where the Lord says, are you ready? Are you ready? Do you want to come and join me? Do you want to benefit from the grace and the love and the mercy I have for you? Do you want to be accepted into the people of God and be part of the new Israel, if you like, part of the great group of believers who serve God and enjoy the love of God in our everyday lives? Do you want to be never alone? Do you want to be constantly aware that there is a greater power than anything in this entire world that has your well-being at heart, that cares more about you than anybody? That's the invitation. The second invitation is for anyone who is engaged in really tough battle at the moment. We want to stand with you. So if you're in either of those two situations, if you're either saying, okay, enough, I'm going to do my Gibeonite thing this morning, make peace with the Lord and say, I want this. Or if you need people to stand with you because it's just really hard on your own, and you may have bottled it up, you may be carrying it all on your own shoulders, allow us to stand with you, please. We want to pray with you. We'll pray that the Lord will be with you. We'll pray that the Lord will strengthen you. We'll pray that the Lord will make your path straight and will resolve the challenges that you're facing today. So when we start singing together, which we're going to in a minute, if you're in one of those two categories and would like people to pray with you, please come forward, sit in the front row if you like, or just wave from your chair if you don't really want to come out. But do make yourself known, because it's important that we minister to each other. And then there's a collective response, and this is one where I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say. But I think the question the Lord's got for us today is, are you up for the fight? Are you up for the fight? Are you really up for the fight? Because he has spent the last 6 weeks, as we've studied Joshua, telling us how to approach the battle. But we still need to make a decision. Are we in this army? Am I ready? Am I ready for this battle that's at my doorstep now? And it is at our doorstep now. The questions are, will you reconsecrate yourself to live a holy life? Will you make prayer and seeking the Lord your priority? Leo spoke last week about, I'm so glad that data is not published on how I spend every minute of my day, because I know I'd be ashamed. I know I'd be ashamed of how little of my day I spend with the Lord. He's challenged me on that. I'll share that with you guys. I'll share that challenge with you guys as well. Will prayer and seeking the Lord, will it be your priority? When you look at your calendar for the next month, what does it tell you about your priorities? Will you live in active faith every day, depending on him, not just believing in him? Will you constantly remember the Lord's grace and faithfulness to spur you on? Remember we looked in Joshua 4 and we looked at the stones that the Israelites erected in memory of the Lord's power and grace and mercy and involvement in their national life. Will you remember the Lord's mercies to you, to stir you on, to remember his faithfulness, to remember his power, to remember his authority, and as a reminder that is who he is faithful, and he will do it again, and he'll do it again, and he'll do it again. Will you prepare yourself and with your friends here and in the broader church, ready for battle? Will you prepare yourself? And will you live without the compromise of secret sin in your life? Leo was very clear last week about the need to deal with secret sin. Anybody still got it in their pocket? Need to get rid of it. Need to deal with it. We need to be holy. So, this is a time point from the Lord in terms of where we've been going for the last couple of months. And I think we're at the point where he's saying, are you ready to double down in your commitment? Are you ready to double down, church? Are you ready to be fully engaged in the battle for souls of men and women? Because that's really what we're about. We're about a battle for the souls of men and women. Will you be on the street sharing your faith? Will you talk to the person sitting next to you at work about your faith? Will you be brave enough to talk to your family about it, even though it's the most embarrassing and difficult thing in the world? This is our Canaan, church. But if we give ourselves fully over to him, he will deliver it into our hands. The battle is not ours in the end. It says in Samuel, in the story of David and Goliath, that the battle belongs to the Lord. And when Goliath is mocking David, saying, "You? Do you think I'm a dog to attack me with have children with sticks attacking me?" And David quite rightly says, "It's not me you're against, Goliath, it's the Lord. It's the Lord of lords, the King of kings, the Almighty, the ruler of heaven and earth, the God Rahab confessed as the God of heaven and over the whole earth." Are we ready, church? If you are ready, it's up to you to make that deal with the Lord, but we're going to sing. We're going to sing a song about committing to the Lord's battle for us.